Les Chandler was an avid birdwatcher and naturalist who taught himself every aspect of photography so he could capture his obsession. In 1915, the apprentice jeweller from Melbourne enlisted and began training at Seymour Army Camp. There he took this photo, lyrically entitled War and Peace, using the drover as a metaphor for peace and the burgeoning rows of army tents as the symbol of war. But it was this sight that repulsed him. Straw dummies used as bayonet practice in the art of killing.
That sort of humanised it for him, and he said he wouldn't go into active combat, so he became a stretcher bearer.
Les Chandler became intent on saving lives, not taking them.
He just said he couldn't kill anybody, he just couldn't face that. And he thought that at least he would be doing his bit, as they used to say in those days, going out and just joining the field ambulance instead. Because originally he was in the light horse.
For a nature-loving pacifist like Les Chandler, to be in a war was cruel. He took some images of horror, but his photos mostly shun death and destruction. They mark life. He found beauty amidst the ugliness of war, and afterwards, like most veterans of the First World War, he never spoke of what he witnessed or endured.
He just said you couldn't talk about it, and he didn't want to talk about it. There were other things that were more interesting.
But a century on, what Les Chandler experienced and photographed is of great interest to many. They're a unique insight into another age. They paint an intimate portrait of one man's war.
Oh, very much. There's only one that shows his work as an ambulance man carrying stretchers on the duckboards, and he talks about slipping and falling off. But there's pictures of him catching butterflies with his uniform on the Western Front, talking about the wildlife, the people. It's really lovely stuff.
He was always going on nature walks. So if he had time off, he would go off and walk into a wood or go and look for birds' nests or chasing butterflies and insects or whatever, because he was interested in the whole of nature.
Over his lifetime, Les Chandler amassed many hundreds of rare and wonderful photos. Now, priceless, delicate images have been preserved for posterity. During the past year, Melbourne photographer Michael Silver, assisted by the Anzac Centenary Major Grants Program, has travelled the length and breadth of Victoria, uncovering, documenting, scanning and preserving photographs, artefacts and documents pertaining to the First World War. Many are family treasures. Some are drawn from small regional museums. Most have never before been seen in public, but all of the images included in Grief and Glory, now on show in Melbourne, have immense historical importance.
Tonight's exhibition helps us learn more about the thousands of ordinary Victorians who served our country in its time of need. It also increases our understanding of the Anzac experience and the service and sacrifice of those who served and those who kept the home fires burning.
The exhibition title, Grief and Glory, derives from a phrase coined by a Brisbane clergyman who was trying to find some meaning in the insanity of war. Tony Pollard has seen war's aftermath at first hand. From 2008, he led an international team of archaeologists who excavated a mass grave of Australian and British soldiers killed in France in battle in 1916.
Incredibly powerful. I'm an archaeologist and I was heavily involved in the Fromelles project, recovering the Australians from Fromelles. And that was all about the dead and the recovery of the dead, but this is obviously about the living, and seeing these guys in these photographs as human beings and young blokes larking around in some cases is phenomenal. And there are strong analogies with the archaeological work that I do. You guys have been raking through old barns and attics and making these discoveries. There's a very strong analogy there, so I can relate to them very closely.
These images also mean a great deal to Ted Roberts. His father spent his 16th birthday on the Western Front. Ted and his wife Lorraine run the Red Cliffs Military Museum near Mildura in northern Victoria. Ted is in his mid-80s and the couple has been at the museum's helm as volunteers for 3 decades.
A couple of past presidents have helped, and now seeing they've turfed it, it's up us to keep it going now with my wife, who is the curator now. Everybody enjoys it, but we could do with a hell of a lot to help us. There's only the few.
For Ted Roberts, the photographic scanning project has been a revelation. Suddenly, small, indistinct photos, often darkened and stained by age, are given new clarity, new life, new relevance.
Actually, it's like a Pandora's box. You open it up and all of a sudden, that wasn't there in the original picture, but there it is. You know, it seems so wonderful to look at them. It's a great surprise to see them blowing up and you can see what's there.
They're real people, they're not just these tiny little photos you can hardly see. And they're all very big files, so you're really capturing the original, all the information that's there. Look at them. It's a group of half a dozen guys in a trench.
You just looked at the photographs before, but now you can look into them.
Yes, yes.
Which is good. I am looking towards getting a disc on this, and then we can have a show the boys what we've been looking at for ages and never seen.
Yeah.
So you've got a mixture of caps and slash hats, so
you do, yeah. That's the joy of doing this. You've got all that information there and you can look deeply into them.
Yeah.
It's really quite wonderful.
Across Australia, there are small museums like this, and most confront a common challenge. How can they best preserve fragile photographic treasures? Expertly scanning them takes a lot of time, and it's costly. For wartime photos taken 100 years ago, time is running out. They're becoming increasingly delicate, and their chemicals are degrading. As he's worked on this project, Michael Silver has learnt of many important, privately held collections that are fading fast.
We know of quite a few collections, but you just got to make friends and hope that we can get to scan them properly to save them, because they are getting to the end of their physical life at 100 years. But the breadth of this collection, the stories, the words, the artefacts is just quite extraordinary and just needs saving.
As chair of Victoria's Anzac Centenary Committee, former State Premier Ted Baillieu is an enthusiastic supporter of the scanning project.
It's hard to believe after 100 years, but there are still shoeboxes out there in the back of the top drawer of a tall cupboard filled with stuff. They might be letters, mementos, they might be photographs, but it's still there. And it's been there through the generations that have followed. And so often no one's touched it because they don't know what to do with it. But we need that information to come out now.
And it's really nice to see things that are freshly discovered. They're not the same photographs that we see in every other book that comes out on the Great War. These are genuine discoveries. And I really like the idea that they're scanned and brought into the public domain. It's kind of like a community project. So I'm staggered by it, really. I think it's phenomenal, and I think we should be doing it in the UK.
There's another reason why this project is so important. With the centenary of Anzac, the Australian War Memorial has been swamped by offers of donations of wartime material. So much that it's often had to turn it down.
Michael also collected as much detail about the photos as he could. Dates, names, places and the known information about the images as told by the descendants of these First World War service people.
But the important thing to remember is every family's single story is also someone else's story. There are other original Anzacs, other families, other places, other events mentioned in those letters, seen and available in those photographs. And all of it connects together.
The collections, sometimes orderly and detailed albums, reveal much about the men who made them.
Very much so. I feel like I know all these blokes really through the pictures, the stories, and through the relatives that have the pictures. I think that's been a real joy. I want to preserve them too. Usually they're people that are quite elderly. They're really just marvellous to meet and spend time with and learn.
Les Chandler had dreamed that after the war, he and his best mate, Maury Thompson, would team up and sell stories and photographs on nature to magazines and newspapers.
When you read the letters, it was a wonderful friendship, but ended as so many did in the war.
Out of a population of about 1.45 million in 1914, about 112,000 Victorians volunteered and served with the Australian Imperial Force, and of those, about 19,000 were killed. That's almost 1/3 of Australia's dead in World War I.
In 1917, Maury Thompson was killed on the Western Front. Les Chandler's war ended a year later.
He was gassed at Villers-Bretonneux, yes, and that was virtually the end of the war for him. He went back to hospital in England and he didn't go back to the front. He always had problems with his lungs after that.
Despite his wartime injury, Les Chandler, like thousands of other ex-servicemen, was granted virgin farmland by a grateful nation. From the early 1920s, they gouged out, quite literally, new lives.
I think they were given a square mile of country, plus an axe, a mattock, and a couple of other things. Build yourself a farm out of that. So you can see why a lot of them walked off after. Yeah.
He started from scratch, which meant clearing the land, planting it up, building the fences, building a home. They'd lived in a tent for quite a long time. His father came up and helped him.
And Les Chandler always carried his camera, documenting life.
I don't think there would be a day go past that he wouldn't have a camera in his hand.
Struggling to make a living, but the amount of work that he did and the effort he went to, and technically how difficult it is with the equipment he had. Beautiful timing, beautiful pictures.
It's hoped this exhibition can be funded to tour regional Victoria and eventually go on show across the nation, all the while bringing to light more priceless collections and more untold stories through the sharing and preserving of new aspects of the experience of Australians at war.
They will be online. There's a website, Victorian Collections, which is run by Museum Victoria. So they'll be up there with captions soon. It's a huge job, the data entry, but they'll be up there low res for families and school projects.
The exhibition is only a sample of what has so far been collected.
These photographs are a priceless record of our First World War history. They bring us closer to an understanding of the events of the Great War and how the conduct of our forces came to define what it meant and what it means to be an Australian.
It's to commemorate that we are a lucky country to have those personnel that have stood up and given us what we've got today.
It was pretty horrific, and war is horrific, and the thing is to try and show people what really happened and just, you know, avoid war at all costs. There must be other ways to get round these problems.
Les Chandler became a prolific contributor to nature journals and a pioneer conservationist. He died in 1980, aged 92, and now his photographic legacy is secure.
I am very proud of him, and I think I'm lucky that I grew up with him and had him as a dad.